Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in opposition to the Disaster Management Amendment Bill 2024 moved by the Honourable Minister because it is a disaster. So I'd like to elucidate our perspective on the legislation we had great expectations of, but which appears to have been taken out of the oven half-baked and rushed into this hallowed chamber, clamouring to be passed. That this bill is even being debated in Parliament is miraculous because, as several of my colleagues in the opposition pointed out in the first week of August, 1st of August 24, when the Honourable Minister of State introduced this bill, this legislation was brought under entry 23 of the concurrent list of the Constitution. Now, Mr. Speaker, you don't have to be a constitutional expert to realise that social security and social insurance, employment and unemployment, which is the subject of entry 23, does not even remotely cover disaster management. It's another matter that had the government actually tried legislating on the issue of unemployment, unemployment in India might not be in such disastrous shape. But chalo, par chalenge koi nahi, we will carry on, sir. But anyway, here we are with a speaker, with a bill hurried into Parliament on a constitutionally untenable, federally unviable ground, and with a host of other drawbacks that diminish even the little imagination and innovation that the centre has sought to display. Now, before the Treasury benches accuse the opposition of opposing just for the sake of it, let me reassure them that I find myself in agreement with the rationale for this bill that the Minister has just explained. So, in my first parliamentary term, I was the convener of the Parliamentary Forum on Disaster Management, which has since been abolished by the NDA government. Yes, the Disaster Management Act of 2005 was in need of rigorous reform. And yes, there is a pressing need to streamline our sprawling and scattered disaster management framework, which, despite the best of intentions, ends up causing inordinate delays in the worst moments, failing to rescue our fellow Indians caught up in disasters. Now, we see, and he's right to say, human lives, infrastructure, Mother Nature, all of these things are affected by disasters. But we need, sir, we as MPs from Kerala understand this very well. Yet far from strengthening and making effective our crisis management mechanisms, and far from bringing, as the Minister has just promised, more clarity and convergence to our prevailing disaster management instruments and institutions, it actually exacerbates the problem, saddling us with an ill-thought-out, overlapping and convoluted distribution of powers amongst the authorities and committees it envisages or retains from the current Act. The net result is a greater centralisation of the Disaster Management Act 2005 and a top-down approach that will create a chain of command so complicated and heavy that it may collapse under its own weight before even mitigating, much less preventing, any horrific disaster like the landslides in Wayanad, which were the most devastating landslides in Kerala's history. On the 3rd of August, Mr. Chairman, the day after my honourable colleague from Wayanad, I made an emotionally searing visit to Wayanad and assisted in the distribution of relief supplies gathered by the MP office in my constituency of Thiruvananthapuram. Picking my way through the rubble to view the destruction of Mundakai, Churalmala and Puncherimattam, I beheld massive JCBs rumbling, where till 5 days previously, lavishly green, hilly villages had sprawled beneath great blue skies. At a hospital suffused with the anguish of countless Indians whose homes and dreams were pulverized by bombardment of rocks and boulders in the early hours of 30th July, I met a young survivor who had endured inconceivable horrors. Just 8 years old, sir. She had lost her father, mother, brother, sister, grandfather and grandmother, and sustained numerous injuries from broken bones to a heavily bruised face. As I saw her propped up in bed, immersed in a colouring book, a desolation gripped me, sir. We should have been able to predict better what was to come, prepare for it, and even to prevent it. But we failed at all of these. The wails of Wayanad and the scenes of devastation and despair that greeted me there and my colleagues who have been there and in the relief camps will forever haunt me. All of us together owed it to the more than 480 people who perished in Wayanad and an equally staggering number who were grievously injured to ensure that no Indian citizen in any part of our country ever again has to endure such a gruesome fate. But this bill, I'm afraid, does not guarantee that. Right off the bat, this bill promises, as I mentioned, greater clarity and convergence in the roles of authorities and committees working in the field of disaster management. But in reality, it confuses and complicates and typically just concentrates power in the hands of the central government. This is evident when the bill accords statutory status to the National Crisis Management Committee and the High-Level Committee, both of which predate this bill, but without explaining why. Pursuant to Clause 6, the Cabinet Secretary will chair the National Crisis Management Committee, with the central government deciding everything: who will be part of it, who will be invited to participate in its meetings, what powers it will exercise, the functions it will perform, and even what procedures it will follow in exercise of the power and discharge of its functions. In other words, though on paper it will be the nodal body to deal with major disasters, in reality it will be a creature of the central government, a timid creature. Nowhere does the government stipulate that such a crucial body should necessarily have ecologists, environmentalists, experts of various kinds who can help us predict, prevent, prepare for, and mitigate natural disasters. This disdain for expertise, Mr. Speaker, is a recurring theme of this bill. Now, given that we already have a National Executive Committee, which is empowered to act as the coordinating body, a National Disaster Response Force for targeted responses, and the overarching National Disaster Management Authority, what is the utility of this committee? Will it not just serve to convolute the chain of command, to delay response time in situations where tardiness can result in the loss of tens of thousands of lives? Further complicating the chain of command and vesting yet more powers in the central government is this: pursuant to Section 8B of this revised Act, the Centre is to constitute a high-level committee with a union minister as chairperson for approving financial assistance under Sections 46 and 47, the National Disaster Response Fund and the Mitigation Fund. Now, ultimately, both these funds shall be applied in coordinates with the guidelines laid down by the central government in consultation with the NDMA. So there's no autonomy to this high-level committee. So once again, the question arises, what exactly shall be the powers of the statutory body? This bill, Mr. Chairman, institutionalizes inadequacies and inefficiencies, especially at the central government level, whereas pre-existing bodies with functions not clearly demarcated, overlapping with those of other institutions, have been given statutory recognition. The National Disaster Management Authority, the national linchpin of this Act, remains enslaved to the Ministry of Home Affairs and has no administrative or financial powers of its own, having to route even its minutest decisions through the Home Ministry. A needlessly arduous and time-consuming process. It's also been reported in the media that the NDMA is massively understaffed. I was hoping the Minister would address that in his reply, at least if he's not done so in his introduction. The buck has to stop somewhere, Mr. Chair. And for better coordination of disaster management and mitigation efforts, the NDMA should have been it. They should have been upgraded to a department of the Government of India, even if not to a ministry, but it remains subordinate to the Home Ministry. Even the question of its leadership has not been satisfactorily addressed. It's officially chaired by the Prime Minister. It's normally overseen by Vice Chairperson, who has the rank of a Cabinet Minister. But bafflingly, Clause 3 of this bill says any member of the NDMA is authorized to perform the day-to-day functions of the authority, forgetting that the political heft of a ministerial rank is vital for dealing with states and other ministries and departments of the Union. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, this bill, in its ostensible pursuit to decentralize the decision-making process regarding funds, manages to do something utterly bizarre. It dilutes the entire purpose of a National Disaster Response Fund by removing the specific uses for which the fund was intended. One of the most pressing criticisms of the old Act was the excessive centralization of fund allocation. Many of our states have complained about this, especially when disasters are categorized as severe. The debilitating human cost of such a disaster demands from the centre a sense of urgency, completely absent in the proposed framework. That the centre is bereft of the sense of urgency, let alone of any compassion. It has proved very often, especially when disaster relief funds from the NDRF were casually denied to Tamil Nadu and only disbursed to Karnataka after an inordinate delay. In 2023, when Tamil Nadu and Karnataka found themselves on the brink of catastrophe, they were compelled to move the Supreme Court to access the much-needed NDRF fund. Funds they had a claim to. In Karnataka, and yes, Himachal has been mentioned, others I'm sure will do so. Let me speak of the cases I know. In Karnataka, 196 out of 236 taluks had been officially designated as severely drought affected by the interministerial central team, and the subcommittee of the National Executive Committee recommended financial aid for the state. But despite this, the state, Congress ruled, I admit, had to wait over 6 months to receive the funds, long after the prescribed 1-month period following the IMCT report. This deplorable delay deprived the state of essential resources to protect its citizens and frankly violated their fundamental right to life of the people of Karnataka. Tamil Nadu suffered a similar fate as well, especially in the aftermath of Cyclone Michaung.